Right now, as you're watching this video, something extraordinary is happening.
You're conscious.
You're aware. But here's the thing. Most of what your brain is doing right now, making your heart beat, processing these words, even deciding whether to keep watching, is happening completely outside your awareness. The psychology of consciousness and the subconscious. I'm going to take you on a journey into the most mysterious territory in all of psychology, the landscape of human consciousness itself. And by the end of this video, you'll never think about your own mind the same way again. Welcome to what might be the most mind-bending video you'll watch this year. Welcome to Therapy Hearts. Today we're diving deep into one of the biggest mysteries in science, consciousness. We're going to explore questions that have puzzled philosophers and scientists for centuries. What exactly is consciousness? How much of your behavior is controlled by processes you're not even aware of? And why does any of this matter for your daily life? This isn't just academic theory. Understanding consciousness and the subconscious has practical implications for everything from making better decisions to understanding mental health, from improving relationships to unlocking human potential. So grab a coffee, get comfortable, and let's explore the most fascinating territory of all, your own mind. And hey, if you're ready for this journey, hit that like button and let's dive in. Chapter 1. What is consciousness? Let's start with a deceptively simple question. What is consciousness? Right now you're having an experience. You're seeing colours, hearing sounds, maybe feeling the temperature of the room. But here's what's incredible. You're not just processing this information like a computer would. You're experiencing it. There's something it's like to be you right now. Philosophers call this qualia, the subjective felt qualities of experience. The redness of red, the pain of a headache, the taste of chocolate. A computer can detect wavelengths of light, but it doesn't experience the redness of red the way you do. Humans have wondered about consciousness for millennia. Ancient Greek philosophers like Plato thought the mind was separate from the body, a kind of non-physical soul. Descartes famously declared, "I think, therefore I am," establishing consciousness as the one thing we can be absolutely certain exists. When psychology emerged as a science in the late 1800s, researchers like Wilhelm Wundt tried to study consciousness through introspection, literally looking inward and reporting on mental experiences. But this approach had problems. How do you scientifically study something that's completely private and subjective? Two people could have totally different internal experiences but report the same thing. Or they might have the same experience but lack the words to describe it accurately. Then came the behaviorists in the early 1900s who basically said, forget consciousness, let's just study what we can observe, behavior. For decades, consciousness was considered unscientific, almost taboo in psychology. But consciousness didn't go away. And in the 1990s, something changed. New brain imaging technologies let us peek inside the working brain. Suddenly, we could start to correlate subjective experiences with objective brain activity. Today, consciousness research is one of the hottest areas in neuroscience and psychology. But we still face what philosopher David Chalmers calls the hard problem of consciousness. The easy problems, and Chalmers calls them easy, even though they're incredibly complex, involve figuring out the mechanisms of the brain. How do we process information? How do we form memories? How do we make decisions? But the hard problem is different. Even if we completely map every neuron and understand every brain process, we still face the question, why is there subjective experience at all? Why aren't we just sophisticated biological robots processing information without any inner life? This question might sound abstract, but it has profound implications. If we can't explain consciousness, can we ever truly understand the human mind? And as we develop increasingly sophisticated AI, how will we know if machines become conscious? But let's step back from these deep philosophical waters for a moment. Because even if we can't solve the hard problem, we've learned a tremendous amount about how consciousness works in practice. Chapter 2. The Levels of Mind. Think of your mind like an iceberg. The tip above water, that's your conscious awareness. But the massive structure below the surface, that's where most of the action is happening. Psychologists typically divide mental processes into 3 levels: conscious, preconscious and unconscious. Let me show you what I mean. Right now, you're consciously aware of my voice and these words. But until I mention it, you probably weren't thinking about the feeling of your clothes against your skin, or the weight of your phone in your hand, or the background sounds in your environment. This information was always available to your senses, but it wasn't in your conscious awareness. This is what psychologists call the preconscious, information that's readily available to consciousness, but not currently in the spotlight of attention. Your attention is like a spotlight with limited power. You can only focus on a small amount of information at any given time. Try this. Count backwards from 100 by sevens while I continue talking. Difficult, right? That's because conscious processing has severe limitations. You can only hold about 7 items in working memory at once, and you can really only focus on one complex task at a time. But here's where it gets interesting. While your conscious mind was struggling with that math problem, your unconscious mind was still processing my speech, monitoring your environment for threats, regulating your breathing and heartbeat, and performing thousands of other operations. The unconscious isn't just passive storage, it's actively processing information and influencing your behavior in ways you're completely unaware of. Let me give you a striking example. Researchers have shown people images for just 16 milliseconds, too fast for conscious recognition. Participants said they saw nothing. But their brain activity showed they were processing emotional content and even making moral judgments about faces they never consciously saw. In another study, researchers asked people to choose between products while subliminal images of smiling or frowning faces flashed on the screen. People couldn't see the faces, but they were more likely to choose products paired with smiling faces. This suggests that your unconscious mind is constantly evaluating and influencing your decisions, even when you think you're making purely rational choices. Perhaps the most dramatic example comes from studying patients with blind sight. These are people who have damage to their primary visual cortex, the brain area responsible for conscious vision. In their daily lives, they're functionally blind. But here's the remarkable thing. If you ask a blind sight patient to guess whether there's an object in their blind field, they'll say, "I can't see anything, I'm just guessing." But their guesses are correct far more often than chance would predict. Their brains are processing visual information and guiding behavior, but without conscious awareness. It's like having a whole visual system operating in the shadows of the mind. You can see unconscious processing in your own life through skill acquisition. Remember learning to drive? At first, everything required conscious attention, checking mirrors, adjusting speed, steering. Your conscious mind was completely overwhelmed. But gradually these skills became automatic. Now you can drive while holding a conversation, listening to music, or thinking about your day. The driving knowledge moved from conscious to unconscious processing. This is why experts in any field, musicians, athletes, surgeons, often can't explain exactly how they do what they do. Their skills have become unconscious, automatic, and incredibly sophisticated. But here's a crucial point. Unconscious doesn't mean unimportant or primitive. In many ways, your unconscious mind is smarter and faster than your conscious mind. It can process vast amounts of information simultaneously, and often comes to better decisions than conscious deliberation. In fact, studies suggest that for complex decisions with many variables, like choosing a house or a romantic partner, people who go with their gut instincts often make better choices than those who consciously analyze every factor. So we have this incredible partnership between conscious and unconscious processing. But to really understand how this works, we need to dive into the theories that have tried to explain this relationship. And that's where things get really interesting. Chapter 3. Freud and the Discovery of the Unconscious. No discussion of the unconscious would be complete without talking about the man who brought it into popular consciousness, Sigmund Freud. Now, before you roll your eyes and think, "Oh great, here comes the stuff about wanting to sleep with your mother," hear me out. While many of Freud's specific theories have been debunked, his core insight was revolutionary and remains valid today. Freud proposed that the mind has 3 levels: conscious, preconscious, and unconscious. But unlike our modern understanding, Freud saw the unconscious as a kind of psychological underworld, a repository of repressed memories, forbidden desires, and primitive impulses. According to Freud, we repress traumatic memories and socially unacceptable desires into the unconscious, where they continue to influence our behavior in disguised forms. Dreams, slips of the tongue, neurotic symptoms, these were all windows into the unconscious mind. Freud also proposed his famous structural model, the id, ego, and superego. The id is pure instinct and desire, what Freud called the pleasure principle. It wants what it wants, and it wants it now. The superego is internalized social rules and moral standards, your inner critic that tells you what you should and shouldn't do. And caught in the middle is the ego, the part of you that tries to navigate between the id's demands, the superego's restrictions, and the constraints of reality. Now, here's what's fascinating. While modern psychology has moved far beyond Freud's specific theories, many of his core insights have been validated by contemporary research. For example, we now know that much of emotional processing happens unconsciously. The amygdala, your brain's alarm system, can trigger emotional responses before conscious awareness kicks in. You might start feeling anxious before you consciously realize what's making you anxious. We also know that defense mechanisms, psychological strategies for protecting the ego, are real and measurable. Denial, projection, rationalization, these aren't just Freudian mumbo-jumbo. They're actual psychological processes that help people cope with difficult realities. And here's something Freud got remarkably right. Childhood experiences really do shape adult personality and behavior, often in ways we're not conscious of. Attachment styles formed in early relationships influence how we connect with others throughout our lives. But Freud also got a lot wrong. His theories were based on clinical observations of a small number of upper-class Victorian women, not rigorous scientific research. Many of his ideas about sexuality, gender, and development have been thoroughly debunked. Perhaps more importantly, Freud saw the unconscious as primarily a repository of negative, repressed content. Modern research suggests the unconscious is much more than that. It's an active, intelligent system that's constantly processing information and guiding behavior. One of Freud's most famous disciples, Carl Jung, broke with his mentor partly over this issue. Jung proposed that beyond the personal unconscious, there was a collective unconscious, a deeper layer of mind shared by all humanity. Jung believed this collective unconscious contained archetypes, universal patterns or images that appear across cultures in myths, dreams, and stories. The hero, the mother, the shadow, the wise old man, these weren't just literary devices but fundamental structures of the human psyche. While Jung's ideas venture into territory that's difficult to test scientifically, there's something compelling about the idea that certain patterns of thought and imagery seem to appear universally across human cultures. But whether you buy into Freudian or Jungian theories, the key insight remains. Much of mental life happens outside conscious awareness, and this unconscious activity profoundly influences behavior, emotion, and decision-making. The question is, how do we study these unconscious processes scientifically? And that's where cognitive psychology revolutionized our understanding of the mind. Chapter 4. The Cognitive Revolution. In the 1950s and 60s, psychology underwent a revolution. Researchers began thinking about the mind not as a mysterious unconscious realm, but as an information processing system, like a biological computer. This cognitive revolution gave us new tools for understanding consciousness and unconscious processing. Instead of Freudian repression and sublimation, cognitive psychologists talked about attention, memory, and information processing. One of the most influential theories to emerge from this period is global workspace theory, proposed by Bernard Bars. Imagine your brain as a theatre. At any moment, countless mental processes are happening backstage: perception, memory retrieval, emotional processing, motor planning. But only a small subset of this activity makes it onto the stage of consciousness, into the global workspace where it becomes available to the whole brain. Consciousness in this view is like a spotlight that illuminates certain information, making it globally available for reasoning, planning, and verbal report. Everything else continues to operate unconsciously in the background. This led to one of the most important insights in modern psychology, dual process theory. This is the idea that we have two fundamentally different systems for processing information. System 1 is fast, automatic, and unconscious. It relies on intuition, emotion, and learned associations. System 2 is slow, deliberate, and conscious. It's responsible for careful reasoning, abstract thinking, and complex problem solving. Let me give you an example. Look at this, 2 + 2 all. The answer 4 probably popped into your head automatically. That's System 1, fast, effortless, intuitive. Now try this, 23 or 47 ounce. Unless you're a math genius, you probably had to slow down and deliberately work through this problem. That's System 2, slow, effortful, conscious. You can see these two systems operating throughout your daily life. When you drive a familiar route, System 1 handles most of the work automatically. But when you're navigating somewhere new with a GPS, System 2 takes over. When you meet someone and instantly like or dislike them, that's System 1 making rapid social judgments based on unconscious cues. But when you're evaluating a job candidate or making a major purchase, you engage System 2 for careful analysis. Here's what's fascinating. System 1 is incredibly sophisticated. It can process vast amounts of information simultaneously, detect patterns, and make complex judgments in milliseconds. In many situations, it's actually more accurate than conscious deliberation. Studies have shown that people can accurately judge personality traits, relationship stability, and even election outcomes from incredibly brief exposures, sometimes just milliseconds of observation. But System 1 also has serious limitations. It's biased, easily influenced by irrelevant factors, and prone to systematic errors that researchers call cognitive biases. For example, the availability heuristic makes us overestimate risks that are easily recalled. After seeing news about plane crashes, we overestimate the danger of flying, even though statistically, flying is much safer than driving. The confirmation bias makes us seek information that confirms our existing beliefs while ignoring contradictory evidence. This is why people with opposite political views can look at the same data and reach completely different conclusions. And the anchoring bias shows how arbitrary numbers can influence our judgments. If I ask you whether Gandhi lived to be older or younger than 144 years, and then ask for your estimate of his actual age, your estimate will be higher than if I had first asked about 35 years. These biases aren't flaws in the system, they're features. System 1 evolved to make rapid decisions in a dangerous world where speed often mattered more than perfect accuracy. Better to mistake a stick for a snake than a snake for a stick. But in our modern world, these fast and frugal heuristics can sometimes lead us astray. Understanding when to trust your intuition and when to slow down and think carefully is a crucial life skill. Another key insight from cognitive psychology is the crucial role of attention in consciousness. You might think you're consciously aware of everything in your environment, but attention is incredibly selective. Let me prove it to you. I want you to count how many times the people in white passed the basketball. How many passes did you count? Did you notice anything unusual? If you missed the dancing stick figure in the corner of the scene, don't worry. About half of all viewers miss it. This demonstrates inattentional blindness, our failure to notice obvious things when our attention is focused elsewhere. This isn't a flaw in perception, it's a feature of how attention works. If we were consciously aware of every detail in our environment, we'd be overwhelmed with information. Attention acts as a filter, helping us focus on what's relevant while screening out distractions. But this means that consciousness is much more limited and constructed than we typically realize. What you're conscious of isn't a passive recording of reality. It's an active construction based on where you direct your attention. These insights from cognitive psychology set the stage for the next major advance in consciousness research, the ability to actually see the brain in action. The neuroscience of consciousness in the 1990s, everything changed. For the first time in human history, we could peer inside the living brain and watch consciousness in action. Functional MRI, EEG, PET scans, these technologies revolutionized our understanding of consciousness by letting us correlate subjective experiences with objective brain activity. Researchers began searching for what they called neural correlates of consciousness, or NCCs. These are the specific brain patterns that correspond to conscious awareness. One of the most ingenious ways to study this is through binocular rivalry. Here's how it works. Researchers present different images to each eye simultaneously. Your brain can't process both images at once, so consciousness switches back and forth between them. You might see a house for a few seconds, then a face, then back to the house. The images stay the same, but your conscious experience changes. By comparing brain activity when people report seeing one image versus the other, researchers can identify which brain areas are associated with conscious perception versus unconscious processing. What they've found is fascinating. Conscious perception isn't localized to one brain area. It involves widespread networks of regions working together. One key network is called the default mode network. This becomes active when you're not focused on external tasks, when you're daydreaming, remembering the past, or imagining the future. The DMN seems to be crucial for self-awareness and the sense of having a continuous, unified self across time. Interestingly, this network becomes less active during deep meditation, which might explain why experienced meditators report experiences of selflessness or unity. Another crucial structure is the thalamus, a relay station deep in the brain that some researchers call the gateway to consciousness. Damage to specific thalamic regions can cause profound alterations in consciousness, from vegetative states to complex sleep disorders. Speaking of sleep, studying sleep in anesthesia has provided unique insights into consciousness. When you fall asleep or go under anesthesia, you don't just lose consciousness gradually. It often happens suddenly, like a switch being flipped. Brain imaging during anesthesia shows that consciousness isn't just reduced brain activity, it's the breakdown of communication between brain regions. The brain becomes like an orchestra where the musicians are still playing, but they're no longer coordinating with each other. This has led to theories like integrated information theory, proposed by Giulio Tononi. IIT suggests that consciousness corresponds to integrated information, the amount of information generated by a system above and beyond its parts. According to IIT, you could theoretically measure consciousness mathematically. A photodiode has very little integrated information. It just responds to light. A human brain has enormous integrated information. It integrates input from millions of neurons into unified, complex experiences. This theory makes some startling predictions. It suggests that some systems we don't typically think of as conscious, like certain computer networks or even parts of the internet, might have some degree of consciousness if they integrate information in the right way. But perhaps the most dramatic insights have come from studying people with damaged brains. Split brain patients, whose corpus callosum has been severed to treat severe epilepsy, have taught us incredible things about the unity of consciousness. In these patients, the left and right hemispheres can no longer communicate normally. Present information to just the right hemisphere, and they can't verbally report what they saw, because language is typically in the left hemisphere. But here's what's weird. The right hemisphere clearly perceives and understands the information. It can guide behavior, solve problems, and even express emotions. It's as if these patients have two separate streams of consciousness in one brain. This raises profound questions about the unity of consciousness. Are split-brain patients one person or two? How many streams of consciousness might exist in a normal brain? Another dramatic example comes from studying patients with locked-in syndrome. These are people who are fully conscious but can't move or speak due to brainstem damage. From the outside, they might appear unconscious or vegetative. Brain imaging has revealed that some patients diagnosed as vegetative actually show normal patterns of conscious brain activity. When asked to imagine playing tennis or walking through their house, their brains light up in the same patterns as healthy volunteers. This has revolutionary implications for medical care. Some patients who seem unconscious might actually be trapped inside their bodies, fully aware but unable to communicate. New brain-computer interfaces are beginning to give these patients a voice. All of this neuroscience research has painted a picture of consciousness as an emergent property of complex brain networks. It's not located in any single place, but arises from the coordinated activity of billions of neurons. But understanding the brain basis of consciousness also raises new questions. If consciousness is just brain activity, what does that mean for free will? For personal responsibility? For the nature of the self? And perhaps most importantly, for daily life? If so much of our behavior is guided by unconscious processes, how can we make better decisions and live more fulfilling lives? Chapter 6. The Unconscious in Daily Life. Let's get practical. Understanding consciousness and the unconscious isn't just academic. It has profound implications for how you live your life every single day. Think about the last major decision you made. Maybe it was choosing a career, buying a house, or deciding to enter or end a relationship. How did you make that choice? If you're like most people, you probably think you carefully weighed the pros and cons, considered all the relevant factors, and made a rational choice. But research suggests that's probably not what actually happened. Studies show that we often make decisions unconsciously first, then use our conscious minds to rationalize choices we've already made. It's not that reasoning doesn't matter, it's that intuition and emotion play a much bigger role than we typically realize. In one famous study, researchers asked people to choose between different posters to take home. Half the participants were asked to analyze their reasons carefully before choosing. The other half were told to choose quickly based on their gut reaction. Who was happier with their choice weeks later? The people who went with their gut. When it comes to aesthetic and personal preferences, conscious analysis can actually make us less satisfied with our choices. But this doesn't mean you should make all decisions impulsively. Different types of decisions benefit from different approaches. For simple choices with clear criteria, like which route to take to work, conscious analysis works well. For complex decisions with many variables and trade-offs, like choosing a romantic partner or a career, your unconscious might actually be better at weighing all the factors and finding patterns you can't consciously detect. The key is learning when to trust your gut and when to slow down and think carefully. Some guidelines. Trust your intuition for personal preferences, creative decisions, and choices where you have lots of relevant experience. Use conscious analysis for decisions with clear criteria when you're learning something new or when the stakes are high and you have time to deliberate. But the unconscious influence is much more than just big decisions. It shapes your daily interactions, your judgments about other people, and even your sense of who you are. Let's talk about first impressions. Within milliseconds of meeting someone, your unconscious mind forms judgments about their trustworthiness, competence, and likability. These snap judgments often prove remarkably accurate, but they can also be biased and unfair. The problem is that these unconscious judgments are heavily influenced by stereotypes and implicit biases. We might consciously believe in equality and fairness, but unconsciously associate certain groups with positive or negative traits. The implicit association test reveals these hidden biases by measuring how quickly people associate different groups with positive or negative words. Most people show some degree of implicit bias, even when it contradicts their conscious beliefs. These biases aren't signs of moral failure. They're the result of unconscious pattern recognition systems that have been shaped by cultural messages, media representations, and personal experiences. The first step in addressing them is simply becoming aware they exist. Unconscious processes also heavily influence your emotions. You might suddenly feel anxious without knowing why, or find yourself in a bad mood for no apparent reason. Often your emotional brain is responding to subtle cues that your conscious mind hasn't noticed. Your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, can trigger emotional responses based on unconscious pattern recognition. Maybe someone's facial expression or tone of voice reminded you of a past negative experience, setting off an anxiety response before you consciously realized what was happening. Understanding this can help you respond more skillfully to emotions. Instead of immediately believing your emotional reactions reflect reality, you can pause and ask, what might my unconscious mind be responding to? Is this emotion proportional to the current situation? Meditation and mindfulness practices are particularly valuable because they help you become more aware of these usually unconscious processes. You start to notice the subtle thoughts, emotions, and bodily sensations that normally operate below the threshold of awareness. Your unconscious also plays a crucial role in creativity and problem solving. How many times have you struggled with a problem, given up in frustration, then suddenly had the solution pop into your head while you were in the shower or taking a walk? This is your unconscious mind at work. While your conscious attention is focused elsewhere, unconscious processes continue working on the problem, making connections and generating insights that can suddenly bubble up into awareness. Research suggests that incubation periods, taking breaks from actively trying to solve a problem, can actually improve creative solutions. Sometimes the best thing you can do is stop consciously trying and let your unconscious mind work. But perhaps nowhere is the unconscious more important than in your relationships. Most of your attachment behaviors, how you connect with others, what makes you feel secure or threatened in relationships, operate largely outside conscious awareness. These patterns were formed early in life based on your relationships with caregivers. If you had secure, responsive caregivers, you likely developed a secure attachment style. You're comfortable with intimacy and trust that others will be there for you. But if your early relationships were inconsistent, rejecting, or chaotic, you might have developed insecure attachment patterns that continue to influence your adult relationships in unconscious ways. The good news is that these patterns aren't fixed. Conscious awareness of your attachment style, combined with new relationship experiences, can gradually shift these deep unconscious patterns. Understanding your unconscious patterns in decision-making, emotions, creativity, and relationships doesn't diminish your agency. Instead, it gives you more choice. When you understand how your mind works, you can work with it more skillfully, rather than being unconsciously driven by it. But there's one more area where the unconscious plays a crucial role, one that shapes your entire sense of who you are: memory. Chapter 7. Memory and the Unconscious Self. Close your eyes for a moment and think about your earliest memory. What do you see? How old were you? Where were you? Now here's a question that might disturb you. How do you know that memory actually happened the way you remember it? Memory feels like a video recording of the past, but it's actually much more like a story that gets rewritten every time you tell it. And much of what shapes these stories happens unconsciously. Let's start with what most people don't realize. You have multiple memory systems, and most of them operate unconsciously. Explicit memory is what you typically think of as memory, conscious recollection of facts and events. This includes semantic memory for facts. Paris is the capital of France. And episodic memory for personal experiences. My first day of college. But you also have implicit memory systems that operate unconsciously. Procedural memory stores skills and habits: how to ride a bike, how to type, how to drive. You can't consciously explain these skills in detail, but your body remembers them perfectly. Then there's priming, when exposure to one stimulus influences responses to later stimuli without conscious awareness. If I show you the word doctor and then ask you to complete the word fragment N-R-S-E, you're more likely to write nurse than if I hadn't shown you doctor first. Emotional memory is another largely unconscious system. Traumatic or highly emotional events can create implicit emotional memories that influence your responses long after you've consciously forgotten the original event. This is why you might feel inexplicably anxious in certain situations, or have strong positive or negative reactions to people, places, or experiences without being able to explain why. Your implicit emotional memory is responding to unconscious associations. But here's where things get really interesting. These unconscious memory systems profoundly shape your sense of identity and personality. Your personality isn't just your conscious beliefs and values. It's also the accumulation of countless unconscious memories, habits, and learned responses. You are, in many ways, the sum total of everything you've unconsciously learned about how to be in the world. This happens through a process psychologists call implicit learning. From infancy, you're unconsciously absorbing patterns from your environment, how emotions are expressed in your family, what behaviors are rewarded or punished, how people relate to each other. These learned patterns become so automatic that they feel like just who you are, but they're actually the result of unconscious learning processes that continue throughout your life. For example, if you grew up in a family where conflict was avoided at all costs, you might unconsciously learn to be hypervigilant for signs of tension and to reflexively try to smooth things over. This becomes so automatic that you think you're just a peacemaker by nature. But understanding that these patterns were learned means they can also be unlearned or modified. Therapy often works by bringing unconscious patterns into conscious awareness, where they can be examined and changed. Your autobiographical memory, your story of who you are and how you got that way, is also heavily influenced by unconscious processes. You don't remember everything that happened to you. You remember a selected, edited, and interpreted version of events. And this editing process is far from neutral. Research shows that people unconsciously distort their memories to maintain a coherent, positive self-image. You're more likely to remember events that fit your current beliefs about yourself, and to forget or reinterpret events that don't. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. It helps maintain psychological well-being and a stable sense of identity. but it does mean that your memory isn't an objective record of your past. It's a construction that serves your current psychological needs. Perhaps most remarkably, research has shown that it's possible to implant false memories that feel completely real. In one study, researchers convinced adults that they had been lost in a mall as children, an event that never actually happened. The participants didn't just intellectually believe this false event had occurred, they developed detailed emotional memories of being lost, feeling scared, and being rescued. These false memories were indistinguishable from real ones in terms of how vivid and meaningful they felt. This research has profound implications for everything from therapy to the legal system. If memories can be unconsciously distorted or even fabricated, how do we know what really happened in the past? But rather than being disturbing, understanding the reconstructive nature of memory can actually be liberating. If your sense of identity is partially based on stories you tell yourself about the past, and if those stories can be rewritten, then you have more power to shape who you become than you might think. This doesn't mean living in denial about the past, but rather recognizing that the meaning you give to past events is flexible and can evolve as you grow and change. In fact, some of the most effective therapies work by helping people develop new narratives about their lives, not changing what happened, but changing the meaning and significance of what happened. So, your unconscious memory systems are constantly shaping who you are, how you behave, and how you see yourself. But unlike the deterministic view of the unconscious that some theories propose, modern research suggests that awareness can give you agency over these usually automatic processes. Which brings us to the big question: what does all this mean for how you should live your life? Chapter 8. Putting it all together. So here we are, after diving deep into the ocean of consciousness and the unconscious mind. Let's surface for a moment and ask, what does all of this actually mean for your life? First, let's acknowledge something profound. You are not who you think you are. Or rather, you're much more than who you think you are. Your conscious mind, the narrator in your head that you identify as you, is actually just the tip of an enormous iceberg of mental activity. Most of who you are and what you do emerges from unconscious processes that operate outside your awareness. But this isn't cause for despair or fatalism. Understanding these unconscious processes gives you more power over them, not less. Here are some practical takeaways from everything we've covered. First, trust your intuition, but verify when the stakes are high. Your unconscious mind is incredibly sophisticated at pattern recognition and can often reach good decisions faster than conscious deliberation. But it's also biased and can be influenced by irrelevant factors. Learn to recognize when you're in System 1 versus System 2 mode. When you're stressed, tired, or emotionally activated, you're more likely to rely on automatic, unconscious processing. These are times to slow down and engage more deliberate thinking for important decisions. Second, become aware of your unconscious biases and patterns. We all have them. They're not moral failings, but predictable features of how the human mind works. The first step in addressing them is simply acknowledging they exist. Pay attention to your automatic emotional reactions. Ask yourself, what might I be responding to unconsciously? Are there patterns in what triggers me? Often, strong emotional reactions reveal unconscious associations or memories that are worth exploring. Third, cultivate mindfulness and present moment awareness. Meditation and mindfulness practices help bring usually unconscious processes into the light of awareness, giving you more choice in how you respond to situations. But don't aim for total conscious control. That's neither possible nor desirable. The goal is a skillful partnership between conscious and unconscious processing, using each system for what it does best. Fourth, understand that your personality and behavior patterns were largely learned unconsciously, which means they can be changed. You're not fixed or predetermined by your past, even though past experiences continue to influence you. Therapy, conscious practice, and new experiences can gradually shift even deep unconscious patterns. It takes time and patience, but change is possible at any stage of life. Fifth, be humble about the limitations of consciousness. You can't be aware of everything, and trying to consciously control everything will exhaust you and make you less effective. Learn to work with your unconscious mind rather than against it. Create environments that make good choices easier. Develop habits that align with your values so you don't have to rely on conscious willpower all the time. Finally, remember that consciousness is not just an individual phenomenon. It emerges from your relationships and interactions with others. Your sense of self is partially created through your connections with other conscious beings. This means that improving your relationships and communities isn't just good for others. It's literally part of how you create and maintain your own consciousness and well-being. So what's the ultimate message here? It's that consciousness is both more limited and more extraordinary than we typically imagine. More limited because so much of what you do and who you are happens outside conscious awareness. You're not the master of your own mind in the way you might think. But also more extraordinary because consciousness, this subjective, qualitative experience of being you, remains one of the deepest mysteries in the universe. The fact that matter can organize itself into patterns that give rise to inner experience is genuinely miraculous. And you're part of that miracle. Every moment of awareness, every conscious experience you have, is the universe becoming aware of itself through you. But don't let the philosophical profundity distract from the practical implications. Understanding consciousness and unconscious processing can help you make better decisions, have better relationships, be more creative, and live a more fulfilling life. It can also increase your compassion, both for yourself and others. When you understand that everyone is largely driven by unconscious processes they don't fully understand or control, it becomes easier to forgive mistakes and focus on growth rather than blame. So, as you go forward from watching this video, I encourage you to become a student of your own consciousness. Pay attention to when you're operating automatically versus consciously. Notice your patterns and biases without judgment. Cultivate awareness while accepting the limits of awareness. And remember, the goal isn't to become a perfectly rational, conscious being. That's neither possible nor human. The goal is to become more aware, more skillful, and more compassionate in how you navigate the extraordinary mystery of being conscious in an unconscious universe. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the hard problem of consciousness to the practical implications of unconscious processing. If your head is spinning a bit, that's normal. These are some of the deepest questions humans have ever grappled with. The key insight I hope you take away is this: you are both more and less than you think you are. Less in the sense that much of your behavior is guided by processes outside your control. More in the sense that you participate in the most extraordinary phenomenon we know of, consciousness itself. If this video has sparked your curiosity about consciousness, psychology, or neuroscience, that's wonderful. There's so much more to explore, and we're living in an exciting time when new discoveries about the mind are happening constantly. I've put links to some excellent books and resources in the description if you want to dive deeper into any of these topics. And if this video was helpful or mind-expanding for you, hitting that like button really helps the algorithm share it with others who might be interested in these ideas. Let me know in the comments what surprised you most about consciousness and unconscious processing. What insights from this video might change how you think about your own mind? Thanks for taking this journey with me into the deepest mysteries of the mind. Until next time, stay curious about the extraordinary phenomenon of being you.